It's a really interesting thing when you look at salespeople, kind of a head scratcher.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think that really aggressive ones, the takers focus only on their commission, they'd be the top earners, right?
That's the common assumption, yeah.
But the data, it shows something weird. The people making the least money
Mm.
and the people absolutely crushing it.
They share something.
Exactly. They're often givers. So it really makes you stop and think, like, what does it actually take to succeed? Is being generous, a strength, or is it maybe a weakness?
That's really the core question we're digging into today. We're doing a deep dive into Adam Grant's book, Give and Take.
Right.
It's a book that's really stirred up a lot of conversation.
Yeah.
Got great nods from people like Daniel Gilbert, Kenneth Frazier, Teresa Amabile.
High praise.
Definitely. And what they all seem to appreciate is how it mixes, compelling stories with actual solid research. It pushes you to think about how you interact with people are mostly a giver, a taker, or maybe a matcher.
Okay, let's clarify those terms quickly. Taker, pretty obvious, right? Always asking, what's in it for me?
Yep. Focused on getting more than they give.
Matcher, they're all about fairness. Quid pro quo, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Keeping things even, exactly.
But the giver, that's the interesting one. Someone who genuinely likes helping out, contributing, without immediately thinking about getting something back.
That's the profile. And our mission today is really to unpack how that plays out. Where does it lead to success? And maybe where are the potential downsides?
Let's start with that paradox you mentioned, because the book points out, kind of counterintuitively, that givers often end up, at the bottom.
It's true. The research finds them overrepresented there. Like in medical school, the students spending loads of time helping classmates. Sometimes they end up with the lowest grades because, they sacrifice their own study time.
Okay, that makes sense.
And you see it in sales, too, the lowest revenue earners, often givers. Maybe they care too much about the customer's best interest to really push for the sale aggressively.
So they're too nice to close the deal, basically.
It can look that way sometimes. There's this apparent conflict, right, between being genuinely helpful and achieving your own goals.
Yeah, it feels like those two things should go together, but maybe not always.
Mm-hmm.
The book talks about givers getting stuck, saying yes too often.
Exactly. Prioritizing everyone else and their own stuff falls by the wayside. There's a great example with a venture capitalist, David Hornick, super keen to invest in an entrepreneur, a guy named Shader.
Okay.
Hornick moved fast, made a really generous offer, seemed genuinely enthusiastic.
Sounds good so far.
But Shader, he actually got worried. He saw Hornick's generosity and his agreeableness and thought, is this guy going to challenge me enough? Is he going to be too nice to give me the tough feedback I need?
Wow, okay, so the generosity backfired.
In a way, yeah. Shader ended up choosing a different investor, someone known for being more demanding. It really highlights how even well-intentioned giving isn't always perceived the way you'd expect, or isn't always what the other person actually needs.
Right. So that paints one picture. Givers struggling, maybe being taken advantage of, or their generosity misinterpreted.
But then
there's the flip side. Because the same qualities also show up at the absolute peak of success.
that's the fascinating twist.
Those top salespeople we mentioned, they're not takers or matchers, they're often givers, averaging like 50% more revenue.
Huge difference.
And the medical students. Over time, the givers actually see their grades climb significantly, like 11% higher.
Yeah, it suggests a longer-term benefit.
So how do we square that circle? Givers at the bottom, givers at the top. What separates them?
Well, it's not just about giving, it's how you give and understanding the context. And this brings us to the idea of, takers who aren't obvious about it. Takers in disguise.
Ah, the fakers.
Exactly. People who put on a show of generosity, but underneath it's all self-serving.
Like the Kenneth Lay example from Enron. Publicly, he looked like a big giver.
Yeah.
Right? Charitable foundation, perks for employees.
Right. Cultivated that image very carefully. But behind closed doors, we know how that story ended. Misusing company funds, deception, the whole massive scandal.
A total disaster.
And it really drives home the difference between genuine giving, wanting to contribute, and just faking it for personal gain. Lay's actions show how easily that generous facade can be used to manipulate.
Kind of disturbing.
The book even makes an interesting point comparing annual report photos. John Huntsman Sr., known as a real giver, versus Ken Lay around the same time. Subtle differences in presentation that maybe, just maybe, hint at their underlying style.
Like reading the corporate tea leaves. You mentioned earlier it feels like it's getting harder for these fakers to keep up the act today.
I think so, yeah. With everything being so connected online, LinkedIn, Facebook, Glassdoor, whatever, your reputation follows you much more easily.
Right. Word gets around faster.
Definitely. The book mentions companies like Groupon actually using social networks in hiring. They check profiles, see mutual connections, try to get a real sense of someone's reputation from peers. It's just harder to maintain a fake persona when everything's so transparent.
Okay, so that transparency helps filter out the takers,
Mm.
which leads us nicely into the power of giver networks. Adam Rifkin comes up as a key example here.
Oh, yeah. Rifkin's almost legendary in networking circles. Huge number of connections, really influential.
So what's his secret? Is he just constantly asking for favors?
Complete opposite, actually. His whole philosophy is built on giving first. He's built this massive network over years by doing small, consistent acts of kindness, little introductions, helpful feedback, sharing resources,
Just helping people out?
pretty much. Driven by a genuine desire to see his connections succeed without expecting an immediate tit for tat. There's that story about him building a fan website for Green Day.
The band.
Yeah, way back, before they were huge. He just liked their music and wanted to share it. No angle, just enthusiasm. And those kinds of genuine acts build real relationships and trust over time.
It's not just about adding new contacts then, it's about the quality.
Hmm.
And the book talks about dormant ties too, people you haven't spoken to in ages.
Right, that's a really interesting point. Those old contacts, people you knew maybe years ago,
Yeah.
they can be incredibly valuable. They offer fresh perspectives, new information you don't get from your regular circle.
But you don't have to start from scratch building trust.
Exactly. You already have that foundation from your past relationship. And the research shows givers often find it easier to reconnect. Because they left a positive impression, people are usually happy to hear from them and help out. It's like they've built up this bank of goodwill.
That makes sense.
Ah.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to collaboration. We often have this image of the lone genius, right? But the book argues givers have an advantage in teams.
Yeah, there's a great study on engineers by Flynn. Initially, the givers seemed a bit less productive than the matchers.
Oh, interesting. But the engineers who were most productive in the long run, they were the ones who consistently gave help, often more than they received directly back.
So putting in the effort for others eventually paid off for them.
It seems so. It builds trust, makes people want to help you when you need it. It fosters this culture of mutual support.
It's like creating a better team environment overall.
Definitely. And it contrasts sharply with figures like Frank Lloyd Wright, brilliant architect, but known for being, well, difficult. More of a taker in his collaborative style.
Right.
Compare that to someone like George Meyer on The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Hugely successful show.
Legendary.
And Meyer was known not necessarily for writing the funniest initial draft, but for being amazing at rewriting, polishing, doing the less glamorous work that made the whole episode better. He prioritized the group's success.
That's what the book calls expedition behavior. Exactly. Taking initiative, doing what needs to be done for the team, even if it's not your specific job or won't get you immediate credit, that giver mindset benefits everyone, and often the giver gets recognized for it down the line.
And the flip side is true too, right? Taking all the credit can backfire.
Oh, absolutely. The example of Jonas Salk and the polio vaccine. Incredible achievement, obviously.
Saved countless lives.
But his failure to properly credit his research team caused significant damage to his reputation among scientists. It shows the cost of appearing like a taker in a collaborative effort.
Okay, so giving helps build networks, fosters collaboration. What about developing talent, like in mentorship or leadership?
This is another area where givers often shine. It connects to the idea of self-fulfilling prophecies.
You mean like, if you believe someone can succeed, they're more likely to?
Basically, yes. There are classic studies, Rosenthal and Jacobson with kids in school, Dov Eden with military trainees, showing that leader expectations have a real impact. When leaders genuinely believe in someone's potential, they tend to provide more opportunities, more encouragement.
So the person rises to the occasion.
Often, yeah. And givers naturally tend to see potential in others. They approach people with a more optimistic, growth-oriented perspective.
The story of C.J. Skender, the accounting professor, really illustrates this.
It really does. His student, Marie Arcuri, failed the CPA exam.
Devastating, I imagine.
For sure. But Stender wrote her this incredibly encouraging letter. It wasn't about making excuses. It acknowledged the failure, but strongly emphasized her effort and his absolute belief that she would pass eventually.
That must have meant a lot.
Immensely. It shows how givers focus not just on current performance, but on potential and effort. It fosters resilience.
And this ties into the investment theory of intelligence.
Right. The idea that interest and motivation often come before exceptional talent is fully developed. Think about Bloom's study of world-class musicians or athletes.
Hmm.
Initial interest and a willingness to practice, that's often the spark. Givers in mentoring roles are great at spotting that spark, that work ethic, that genuine curiosity, and fanning it into flame, rather than just looking for obvious, ready-made talent. Like Skender seeing potential in Beth Trainum or Reggie Love based on their drive.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty compelling picture of the upside of being a giver, but let's circle back to the downside. How do givers avoid becoming, doormats, getting exploited?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because it definitely happens. The book uses examples like Lillian Bauer, whose generosity seemed to hold back her career, versus Jason Geller, another giver who thrived. Why the difference?
Yo, it's a key.
The book suggests givers can fall into three main traps. One, being too trusting, assuming everyone else is also a giver.
Okay, naive optimism.
Two, being too empathetic, feeling others' needs so strongly they neglect their own. And three, being too timid, unwilling to advocate for themselves or set boundaries.
Right, so successful givers aren't just endlessly selfless.
No, they practice what Grant calls otherishness. It's a balance. You care about benefiting others and you keep your own interests in view. It's not selfless, it's not selfish, it's otherish.
So how do you do that? How do you stay generous but protect yourself?
One key is what the book calls sincerity screening, paying attention to why someone is asking for help.
Trying to read their motives.
Exactly. Like Jason Geller at Deloitte, he's known for being helpful, but he also watches. Is this person genuinely trying to learn or just trying to dump work on me?
Makes sense. What else?
Another thing is focusing on perspective taking more than just pure empathy. Empathy is feeling with someone. Perspective taking is understanding how they think and what they want.
Okay, how does that help?
It's crucial in negotiation, especially with potential takers. Peter Audit's story about the scrap metal client. Rich Audit had to understand Rich's taker mindset to negotiate effectively, not just feel sorry for him.
Got it. So understand their angle.
And interestingly, givers often find it easier to be assertive when they're advocating for others.
Oh, yeah. I totally get that. When I sold ads for the Let's Go Travel guides back in the day,
Yeah.
I fought way harder to get lower rates because it meant more student jobs than I ever fought to get a bigger commission for myself. It felt different.
That's exactly it. It's using what the book calls relational accounts. You frame your assertiveness around how it benefits others, your family, your team, your cause. It gives you stronger footing. Samir negotiating a better salary by focusing on his family's needs is another example.
And research backs this up, that being otherish is actually better in negotiations.
Yeah, Dedru's research suggests the most effective negotiators aren't the hard bargainers or the ones who roll over easily. They're the otherish ones, looking for those win-win solutions.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've talked about individual styles. What about creating environments that encourage more giving? Can we actually build systems that foster this?
The book argues yes. Look at the difference between Craigslist and FreeCycle.
Right, Craigslist is more transactional, lots of matchers, maybe some takers. FreeCycle is explicitly about giving things away.
Exactly. And Willer's research suggests the platform's norms shape who participates and how they behave. FreeCycle attracts and reinforces giving.
And seeing other people give can be contagious, right? That elevation idea.
Definitely. Witnessing generosity can genuinely inspire us to be more generous ourselves. Jonathan Haidt's research backs this up. Seeing role models like the story of the elderly man consistently giving on FreeCycle can create a positive ripple.
But there's a caution, too. The Superman effect.
Yeah, if the example of giving seems too perfect, too unattainable, it can actually discourage people. They think, well, I could never be that good, so they don't even try. Finding relatable role models is key.
And simple social norms are powerful, too. Like telling people their neighbors are saving energy.
That Cialdini research is amazing, isn't it? That was more effective than appeals to environmentalism or cost savings. Just knowing what others are doing shapes our behavior.
So making giving visible helps. Like the reciprocity ring exercise.
That's a great practical example. In a classroom or team setting, everyone publicly posts a request and also offers help. It creates a context where giving is expected and rewarded socially. Even someone leaning towards taking is incentivized to contribute because it's visible.
Clever. It changes the default setting.
Precisely.
So, wrapping things up, successful giving isn't just naive altruism. There's often a strategic awareness involved. The book mentions instrumental giving.
Yeah, that's the idea of helping others partly with an eye towards potential future benefits. It's a bit debated. You risk sounding insincere if that's your only motive and people pick up on it.
Right, authenticity matter.
Hugely. But the book suggests that often genuine giving and recognizing potential mutual benefits aren't mutually exclusive. The key is the underlying intent. And then it offers some really concrete actions people can take.
Things we can actually do.
Yeah, like really questioning why you're helping someone, chunking your giving like regular volunteering instead of random acts, helping people craft their jobs to be more meaningful.
Actively looking for and recognizing the givers around you.
Embracing the 5-minute favor, making a quick intro, giving brief feedback, reconnecting people. Small things add up.
Starting those ripple effects,
Yeah.
maybe anonymously sometimes. Joining or starting a giving group.
Asking that simple question, how can I help? Or even funding projects through things like Kickstarter or Kiva, lots of practical steps.
So the big takeaway seems to be, yes, generosity can be a powerful route to success.
Yeah.
But it's not about being a selfless doormat.
Exactly. It's about being otherish, balancing concern for others with your own needs, understanding motivations, yours and theirs, and building environments where giving is the norm, not the exception.
We're back to that paradox, givers at the bottom, givers at the top. And now we see it's the how of giving that makes all the difference. The mindset, the boundaries, the strategy.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on this week.
Okay.
Think about one small, specific way you could genuinely give or help someone in your network, a colleague, a friend, an old contact, just one thing.
Right.
But as you do it, or think about doing it, try to notice two things. First, the potential impact on them, obviously. But second, what does it tell you about your own reasons for helping? And what kind of ripple effect, however small, might that action create? What could you learn about the dynamics of giving in your own life?